This show is magnificent. What people don't get is that The Boys, much like Invincible, never was about striking visuals, but in The Boys' case, great acting. Still, it is a pristine creme de la creme entertainment product, and here's why. The last season is not what a lot of people think it is. Even though it's supposed to be the end of the story, The Boys was never about the end, but about the journey. And I know that sounds corny, but it's the truth. The greatness of The Boys and why it became so popular in the first place is because of its shock value. The great satire and sarcastic commentary that makes these series stand out, even though it's technically yet another superhero show. The Boys became so great since its inception, even in the midst of superhero fatigue, not to the deep dialogue or the excellent acting, of which it has none, but because in reality of Homelander, and not only that, but the great jokes and moments that the whole series has. When one analyzes the series, the true vision turns so apparent that it and of itself becomes funny. For example, when the writer wanted to include the scenes of Homelander making posts about him being the Messiah, and the President doing this just moments prior, they never wanted to make a good quality TV show by today's standards, or compete to the likes of Breaking Bad, for example, but one that would focus more on trying to one up reality and make it seem silly in comparison, even though the current president makes that very difficult for them. The new season is interesting. From all the posts I keep seeing online, one can tell that the writer himself, Eric Kripke, didn't know how to end the whole ordeal. The virus seems like a fitting deus ex machina, a very common trope just like we have in Invincible. Even so, for the boys, following not quality show but quality entertainment ideology, it feels better for this show in particular. That being said, it does feel like Homelander is going back to his roots. Instead of being the badass Sigma male we came to know from season 3, he feels more like a man child, which was how he was presented to us in the first seasons, and doesn't really feel as imposing as how he was being built up to be throughout the rest of the show. I can understand, therefore, some of the critics regarding him and how he doesn't feel as intimidating, but more like the baby Homelander we saw in the first appearances. Now, with the rest of the characters, a lot of arguments that I see online that people bring up is about the boys themselves, the main cast, or the main group. And to be honest, I don't see it. The main group has always been protected by plot armor and have made dumb decisions all in the name of the greater good message. Yes, there were times in which the show could have a better delivery, better choice of words, or just better something, but I feel like the boys never wanted to be great, but rather they wanted to send a message. When I saw the scene in which the bald bade them try to off Huey, I got really surprised because I thought they were actually gonna do it. This scene could have been great in storytelling if she actually did off Huey in that instance, which would definitely up the stakes, would have done a lot of numbers, and the series would have probably gone more viral than it already has. But they didn't do it. Why? Because not doing it was the cliche thing to do, the silly thing to do, which is what this show has always been about. And there are always going to be people who come and say that the show fell off or that it was better before. It literally has always been the same. Now that it's finished, though, the scavengers want to come and, well, do what they do best. There is something else that I want to discuss. The whole show has included scenes with most of the main cast's parents, and none of them felt really believable to me. Then again, the show was never about that, but in this season we get to see what is possibly the best written parent in the whole series, and that would be Starlight's dad. The scene in which they have a serious talk, then about how she starts to get along with her brother only for him to have called the police moments prior. It all drives the tension into a moment that is not only great and well acted, all things considered, but also real. And I think personally, this is where the show shines brightest. For the people that are living through this right now, the authorities could come knocking into anyone's door at any moment and take your loved ones, all the while you were just in the couch spending family time and not knowing what that it could be your last, just because of the mostly lies that the media has been feeding us in recent memory. This scene especially resonates with me and makes me want to give the show more credit than it is being given. Yes, it may have its moments, like the mole character who is the self-insert of the writer, who since literal episode 1 of the season has been saying that he doesn't know how to wrap things up and that we should cut him a break. But the show has a lot of good stuff, This doesn't mean it's completely invulnerable to criticism, but the show has a lot of good stuff. And this doesn't mean it's completely invulnerable to criticism. I would never vouch for that. But that it does deserve a break, especially from what people have been spewing out online. Because this show is not The Godfather. If there was any reason to criticize it, it would be because it lost its roots, because it lost its way. And it never did. When Firecracker gets emotional in live TV because she's been obligated to preach for things she doesn't believe in, the message gets driven home. And I think what the boys has to say came out at the literal perfect time. I don't know if Eric Kripke had this in mind at all, but if he had, this is some Attack on Titan level of storytelling, because he literally saw the future. And Firecracker's reality is probably something that is happening to people today. And it's so cliche, so exaggerated. But what's funny is even though he was trying to make things worse than reality, he actually hit the nail with the hammer. Because the message couldn't be any clearer. To make sure that we understand that what we live in right now is ridiculous. And not to necessarily make people wake up, but at least poke fun at it and have a good time. To be able to relate with the community that actuality is just a big joke, and that we should see it for what it is, and maybe not make matters more serious than they already are, but to laugh, to entertain. Yes, this is me defending the show, and I think it's much needed, but it didn't go out in a poorly executed manner like a lot of shows have, but rather ended itself how it wanted to. And not only that, they portrayed and parodied real life, trying to one up it even though they can't because it's gotten so ridiculous now. They followed their core ideas to the end, and I can truly appreciate that more than anything. Now, this is the point in which I talk about the real ending. Skip to if you don't want to hear it. The ending starts to wrap up in season 5 when Homelander gets the sole V1 dose there is. Now, Soldier Boy does this in order to follow what his past wife would have wanted, or something. I will say that it's not very Oscar worthy of the show to do. So, if you were invested in the show at all, there are a couple of moments that hit you right in the feels. And one of the most important is French's staff. It was orchestrated greatly. And from the get-go, one could tell that from having him face Homelander face to face, that he would not make it, especially due to the huge overdose of radiation he just went through. Believe me, I would know. This show having a very emotional moment sounds uncanny even, but they have. The main squad is what can really drive home what the show is trying to say. I think even if it doesn't take itself too seriously, that one can still appreciate the build-up he had not only with Kimiko, but with the rest of the crew. That just goes to show how much of a staple the show is. I'll be honest. The last episode feels very much like the long night from Game of Thrones. They were going all out with what they had left, having Starlight fight the Deep, and offing all of the other soups that were left. Having Ryan come into the fight all of a sudden and the very beginning of the episode having started on a ranch makes my mind drift to Infinity War. However, it felt a bit rushed, and even though literally everyone wanted to see Homelander defeated, I believe it would have been good to at least have one more season of Gen V to see everything come to a satisfying closure. I will say though that even if the show got very deviated at one point, it was very satisfying to see Butcher finish Homelander just like he did with Black Noir in the comics. Also, the ending happened to be very similar to that of the comics, having Huey be offered the position of soup affairs, all the while also having to get rid of Butcher in the process. One of my biggest points is that the show was never meant to be taken seriously. We have a guy whose superpower is having a huge and jokes from the get-go. The show never became famous because of its engaging plot points, or great acting, or dialogue. It was never meant to be appreciated in this manner. No parody is ever meant to be appreciated like the masterpiece that it supposedly is. I'm sure everyone involved is doing the best that they can, and that they're capable of delivering a great performance. It's got actors that have been in The Lord of the Rings and Breaking Bad for God's sakes. But the show, the story, the script was never about that. Thanks for watching. I also really like the scene in which Homelander gets radiation poisoning. That is a very clever idea that could definitely work with anybody, no matter how big a soup you are. This is because I studied the effects of radiation on people as a radiation technologist. So this amuses me, not how radiation affects people, of course, but just having my boy uranium being mentioned in one of my favorite shows of all time. Also, I could mention that not every acting performance was bad. Colby Munify does an absolute stellar showing in every episode that she's in. I'd be willing to say she is the only one who gives anything outstanding and that one can appreciate his body and emotional control. Last thing, I want to get this off my chest. I really appreciate all the work everyone involved had to put in, and the effort, the inspiration. It shows. And this show will stand as one of my favorite of all time. I'm sad that it's over, but I'm glad that it happened. Rant is over. Thanks for watching.